edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 14th of February 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Happy Valentine's Day. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with the Russia analyst and author Charles Hecker. Then,
Valentine's Day is obviously incredibly tacky. If it was any tackier, you could use it to pin things up, etc.
Agony Uncle Andrew Mueller answers our romantic woes. And finally, is the new Wuthering Heights film an accurate adaptation? And does it even matter? That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First, though, the news. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz confirmed that Berlin has opened discussions with France about creating a European nuclear deterrent, as Emmanuel Macron argued that Europe must step up as a geopolitical force in the face of a persistent Russian threat. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, Merz said Europe needs to strengthen itself to recalibrate ties with Washington and urged the United States to rebuild trust, warning it cannot navigate a fractured global order alone. New Zealand is preparing for further downpours after severe flooding tore through a regional centre, cutting power, damaging roads and forcing residents from their homes, while a man was found dead inside a vehicle submerged on a highway. Forecasters say the system will intensify from Sunday, bringing heavy rain, winds of up to 120 kilometres per hour and waves as high as 7 metres to Wellington and other parts of the country. And an elephant's trunk underpins almost everything it does, and the roughly 1,000 whiskers that line it play a crucial role in how the animal senses the world. New research shows these whiskers are uniquely adapted with hollow cores and varying stiffness along their length, giving elephants a refined sense of touch that compensates for thick skin and limited eyesight. The report from the Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems says there may be practical applications from the new findings by inspiring new approaches to giving robots a better sense of touch. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin and I'm joined in the studio by my good friend Charles Hecker, author of Zero Sum and Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI. Charles, happy Valentine's Day.
Good morning, Georgina, and happy Valentine's Day to you.
It just feels like today, perhaps like sort of heart-shaped mushroom atomic clouds. It's sort of a mashup of love and the end of the world.
Yes, well, there's nothing like a discussion of a joint European nuclear deterrent to put a little bit of a damper on what's supposed to be a sort of flowery and perfumey and chocolatey kind of day. But that is the sort of contrasting world that we find ourselves in at the moment.
Well, what is the news from Munich?
Well, right. So as we look through what's going on over the past week and today and browsing through the papers, we come to a screeching halt on a headline in the Financial Times. It says, Rubio skips Ukraine meeting with European leaders in Munich. So the Munich Security Conference is in full swing in the Bavarian city at the moment and comes hot on the heels of a very, very turbulent Davos, where Greenland basically blotted out the sun and was the main topic of conversation. Donald Trump made an appearance at Davos, that had a cloud of threats over it about what the United States was going to do with Greenland. That situation was diffused, but the main theme at Munich this year is, according to people like Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, and Emmanuel Macron, and basically almost everybody else, is a continuation of the theme raised by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in Davos, and that is the end or the collapse or, farewell to a final Valentine to the global geopolitical order. And so it's a slightly sort of apocalyptic Munich Security Conference with a couple of interesting dissenting voices. And I noticed a presentation made by Michael McFaul, who was President Barack Obama's first ambassador to Russia, who's saying, everybody, let's have a little courage. Let's have a little bit of intestinal fortitude. The damage to international institutions and global cooperation is not as bad as we think it is. We are going through a crisis, as the world has done over and over again over the course of history, and we will come out the other side.
I mean, Rubio, too, seems to be trying to row back on this because he said we don't need to abandon the systems of international cooperation or dismantle the global institutions of the old order. He's trying to do damage control.
That's right. There's a couple of things that we have to hold Marco Rubio to a fairly strict standard, though, and that is the difference between what he says and what he does. And so he has been saying, as the Secretary of State, the U.S. primary diplomat, might say, he is emphasizing the role of diplomacy, but the story that we turn to in the FT is the story about how he blew out the rest of Europe, basically, by not attending a meeting about Ukraine. And what Rubio told everybody else at Munich was that I'm spending all of my time here thinking and talking about Ukraine anyway. I don't need to meet with the Europeans. And so what this does is it drives a little bit of a rift between the two primary and sometimes competing parties on the future of Ukraine. And so while the United States has dramatically scaled back its support to Ukraine to almost next to nothing, Europe has finally recognized and understood that not only does it have to step up on Ukraine in the absence of the United States, but it needs to step up globally, and is between the opposite poles of Washington and Beijing. Brussels and the rest of the European Union and the United Kingdom must reassert themselves as stalwarts of stability if the rest of the global geopolitical order is about to crumble.
And of course, this happens as Russia is throttling Telegram. That's one of the country's biggest news and messaging platforms. It's how Russians communicate with each other. It's how news gets out. And apparently they're also blocking WhatsApp too.
That's right. This is, I'm very happy to turn to the Moscow Times, my alma mater journalistically from the 1990s. And say that, and read the headline that says, as Kremlin throttles Telegram, Russians stand to lose more than just messaging. Telegram for Russians and in Russia is an absolutely central online platform and app. It's messaging, it's phone calls, it's videos, it's audio, it's microblogging, it has channels. It is one of Russia's primary sources of information. And everybody has a Telegram channel, including voices independent of the Kremlin. And Telegram was a private company. We can discuss that perhaps some other time. And France has accused the Telegram's owner, Pavel Durov, of criminal offenses. Again, a separate story. But the most proximal issue here is that the Kremlin is beginning to shut down Telegram. And by doing that, it is shutting down one of the only independent sources of news and information that Russians have. And on top of that, WhatsApp, the globally popular messaging and phone call platform is now almost being completely shut down. What's happening here is a gradual shift away from private sector players towards a Russian government platform called Max. Max is replacing WhatsApp. It's replacing Telegram. It's replacing any independent or private sector messaging platform. And Russians are meant to be deleting independent apps from their phones, installing Max. Max is a government-owned application, so has a slightly big brothery feel to it.
Listen, I'm determined to wrest this back to Valentine's Day. Will they also clamp down on the dating apps?
So dating apps, if you have a VPN in Russia, you can use...
Visible panty line. No, that's VPL. Sorry.
Sorry, forgive me. I should decode a bit of tech here, and that is a VPN is a virtual private network. And a VPN allows you to pretend that you're using the internet from somewhere else. And so you and I sitting here in London, if we were to use a VPN, we could say that we were logging on from France or from the US. Mostly what people use VPNs for is to watch TV that you have to sort of watch the BBC outside of the UK or to download American television programs outside the United States. But using a virtual private network in Russia allows you to escape government censorship and allows you to use apps, including dating apps, that you might not otherwise be able to use. The problem is that Russia is now also beginning to crack down on the use of VPNs.
Are you on the apps?
I couldn't possibly reveal that sort of information. I think if I were to have my phone stolen and someone were to log on, they might find themselves able to do a little bit of online dating if they wanted.
Well, it's absolutely no secret that I met my partner through Bumble.
I didn't know that.
Did you not?
No.
Oh, wow. He's my third date on Bumble. Within 30 seconds, we realised that we just knew all of these people in common. And it was extraordinary. But the lovely thing about Bumble is that it puts women in charge, that you have to make the first move. Although, inevitably, a group of men is challenging that and thinks that that's wrong and discriminatory.
Well, I didn't know that. That's a fairly sort of tech twist to a romantic tale.
Absolutely.
The use of apps, though, generally, broadly speaking, is dropping. The younger demographic is preferring to meet people IRL, while we're talking about acronyms, which means in real life, I think. And while I think most people's phones probably have a dating app on them if they're single, we might be going a little bit more analog in the dating world.
Absolutely. Well, listen, one person who I imagine has never even considered having a dating app on his phone is Andrew Mueller. That is because obviously he's a cynic about almost everything. And because I'm quite sure he doesn't need an app. A man like Andrew would have no problem with IRL.
I'm sure he's beating them off with a stick.
Well, let's get his guidance on matters of the heart.
Dear Agony Andrew, my boyfriend says Valentine's Day is a commercial holiday as an excuse to not get me a gift. Is that a red flag? Sincerely, my mom warned me.
He's not wrong, so there's that. Valentine's Day absolutely is a commercial holiday. It is almost arguable that every Valentine's gift is purchased out of a sense of resentful obligation, and colossally likelier than not that anything anybody does receive for Valentine's Day will be somewhat wearily plucked from a cornucopia of conventional cliché. A box of chocolates, bouquet of roses, and/or an immense teddy bear clutching a satin heart are therefore of significantly lesser value than literally any more individually tailored and spontaneous devotional offering. Much therefore depends on how he does with presents and so forth the rest of the year. If whatever you got for your last birthday had a petrol station price tag on it, you have some grounds for concern.
Dear Agony Andrew, my boyfriend says it's of the utmost importance to watch his football team play on Valentine's Day instead of taking me for dinner. He says it's a pivotal game, but he says that every weekend. Should I dump him? Best, Miss fed up of watching Mister's team lose.
And women say men can't commit to anything. Honestly, there's no pleasing you. But you do have a couple of options. The more constructive is to be cheerfully, sincerely acquiescent and wave him off to the match on the understanding that you'll get taken out for a fancy dinner on February 13th or 15th, when it will be much easier to get a table, and a table at that, at which you're vastly less likely to be ambushed by rose sellers or violinists. The somewhat more spiteful is to go to the match with him and use this as leverage to compel him at some later date to sit through a musical. The more malicious but possibly more effective is to reply extremely vaguely to his inquiries about how you plan to spend the evening of February 14th, and during the days before repeatedly pick up your phone in his presence and stage whisper, "I told you not to call me at home, I'll see you on Saturday."
Dear Agony Andrew, I think Valentine's Day is a bit tacky, but I do love champagne and I want to make my boyfriend happy. How do I celebrate it in a non-cheesy way? Thank you very much. I am Mr. Too Cool for School.
Valentine's Day is obviously incredibly tacky. If it was any tackier, you could use it to pin things up, etc. And tacky, as you correctly imply, is bad. However, tacky with a certain arch-knowing, unself-conscious joy stirred in gets you to camp, which is generally to be encouraged. So have fun with it. Think of it as your own private Eurovision. You could start, indeed, with an expertly curated playlist of love songs by caterwauling Belgians, Estonian weirdos dressed up as lampstands or whatever, and somewhat suggestive Polish milkmaids.
Dear Agony Andrew, I've fallen for an incredibly intelligent, wildly witty and quite crotchety journalist. I was planning on making my move on Valentine's Day, but he will be in Munich. I have already bought a plane ticket and located his hotel. How should I surprise him? Wistfully, frantic fan.
For a start, don't be too hard on yourself, you're only human. But that almost certainly isn't his hotel. Obviously, for a man of his stature, gravitas and dress sense, being besieged by insistent suitors and clamouring wooers when working abroad is an occupational hazard, and he will have taken the elementary precaution of making a bogus booking under his own name and actually staying elsewhere so he can get some work done without being distracted by knocks on the door, shrieking mobs gathered beneath the window, etc. Given what is understood of his sense of humour, your next step is to call around every hotel in Munich and ask to be put through to George Patton, Bernard Montgomery, Dwight Eisenhower or Norman D. Landing.
Monocle's own agony uncle there, Andrew Mueller. I think we found a new role for him. We need regular romantic advice.
He's a softie at heart.
Will you be celebrating?
I'll be thinking about celebrating Valentine's Day. I was trying to book a restaurant in London this evening, and it is virtually impossible to get a seat anywhere because I think it's full of Valentining couples.
I know. Even as he was talking, I was thinking of sort of in the days when I used to go out to dinner on that. It's just so dreadful. Everything's overpriced. And here's the thing, and I don't want to sound like a smug married because, one, I'm not married. Two, I definitely am smug. But my partner, picks up the dog poo, unloads the dishwasher.
Could there be a better Valentine's gesture?
Honestly, I think that's what matters. But listen, there is a whole new lexicon to love. So our brilliant producer, Mariella Bevan, has found this great piece in the New York Times, the A to Z guide to all things romance. Okay, from cinnamon rolls to stern brunch daddies, here are 101 terms you should know to understand the popular literary genre. So I'm told that when people pick up a love story, they need to know, is it going to have HEA on the cover? People are looking for that. Happily ever after, it means. And some people don't want to read the book unless it's got it on there. But it's got so many other terms that I had never heard of. For instance, apron tugger, shadow daddy, wallflower, fae. All of these things that I had just never heard of before. Are there any in here that you particularly like, Charles?
I wouldn't mind being a stern brunch daddy. And I'll tell you why. First of all, because it involves food. Secondly, because this is sort of a little bit sort of hard on the outside, soft on the inside. The New York Times does us the courtesy of unpacking what a stern brunch daddy is. And it's a combination of two other romance literary terms, including the alpha and the cinnamon roll. And so just for the endless sort of layers of complexity to the stern brunch daddy, but the kind of butch macho exterior sound of it all, that's where I'm parking.
Well, what's a cinnamon roll?
Cinnamon roll is, kind of, again, a little bit crusty on the outside, but then, sort of softer on the inside. It's a male character who's tender and precious, but must be protected from the world, as all geopolitical risk analysts must be. Yes.
Okay, I love apron tugger. And I think my partner is in an apron often. He is, in fact, a baker, a professional baker. But an apron... do you like to... No, I'm not going to say it. An apron tugger, these domesticated contemporary romances feature a culinary element such as a bakery setting or a love interest with impressive patisserie skills. Well, he does have all of those, and he's got this really butch leather apron as well.
Are we moving now towards the BDSM?
Well, we could do.
Georgina, the diversity and the specificity of the lexicon associated with romance novels is baffling and highly intriguing. And, this is opening up an entire new literary genre. Of course, speaking with the head of books for Monocle Radio, this is an entire literary world and genre whose depth and popularity, I think I have consistently underestimated.
It's huge, absolutely huge market. And also in terms of sort of straight to Amazon type books, a lot of romances are just self-published, they're pushed out. Look at 50 Shades of Grey, for instance. That came out, well, as fan fiction actually originally, but then became this huge bestseller. And I think a lot of people tell me that the best way to make money out of writing books in that way is forget traditional route to publishing. If you don't want sort of literary legitimacy, just go straight online and you coin it, apparently.
Forget contemporary historical nonfiction, forget narrative nonfiction. Let's go straight into the fiction.
Well, let's talk about Wuthering Heights, because Emerald Fennell's adaptation of Wuthering Heights was released last night. It's already drawn polarising reviews from critics, and I don't know whether you would class it as a romance or not. But I have some people in the studio now with me who can probably help us with us. Because to unpack the enduring cultural appeal of Wuthering Heights and why it's so often misunderstood, we're joined by Dr. Jessica Gosling and Dr. Alice Condé from Goldsmiths Decadence Research Centre. Oh, how I love that title. What is decadence research, please?
Well, it's the research of decadence. And the way we conceptualise it at Goldsmiths is it's a literary artistic tradition that emerges really out of the 19th century, and the sort of rebellious countercurrent that's running alongside a lot of the sort of progress and technology. It's sort of it emerges out of the Gothic as well, so it's sort of a morose response to modernity. It emerges at times of social and political crisis as well and responds to those. So we're also, I would say, living in a decadent age now. So at Goldsmiths, we're trying to unyoke decadence from the 19th century and consider ways in which our culture is decadent and artistic responses to that.
And is this sort of mostly looking at things like masochistic men and cruel women?
Yeah, to some extent it is. It's also thinking about our attraction to things like perversity, delight in that which repels, lusciousness, and how that can often tip into disgustingness as well.
So this is obviously setting us up perfectly for Wuthering Heights, which is all of those things. But how true is the film to the book, and does it matter? So you guys actually saw it last night.
Yeah, we saw it last night, and we've been processing it since then.
What do you think?
Well, I think adaptations are really interesting because of what they tell us about their cultural moment. And so what Fennell has decided to leave out or keep in is quite fascinating. So, if you're going to watch, if you want to watch it because you love the novel, I think you'll be disappointed. But if you want to watch it because you love the kind of the vibes and the essence of the Victorian, what we think of as Victorian, looking back without knowing anything really about the period, this kind of bodice ripping, oversexed, gorgeous lusciousness, then I think it's a great film for that.
What did you think?
Well, yeah, I agree. It's not a faithful adaptation, and I don't think Fennell has claimed it is such. But she says she was trying to adapt the novel to correspond with her first reading of it at age 14, which, if you've grown up in the British education system, is usually the kind of age that you might encounter this text. It was on, I don't know if it still is, but it was on school syllabuses. And it's a very complex, very nuanced novel, which actually at its heart is, it's not a romance. It's incredibly harrowing to read. At every page you turn, something more horrible happens to the characters. But I think what Fennell has done is take forward the enduring romantic appeal of Heathcliff and Cathy's doomed relationship. And I think that is something that many younger people might respond to on first reading.
What about the idea of race-blind casting? Because I haven't seen the film, but was initially dismayed to hear that really one of the most famous non-white characters in literature was being played by a white person, Elodie. But in other areas of the film, you've got traditionally white characters played by black characters. So just unpack that for me a little.
Yeah, it's so different to the novel that actually that casting mischoice, I think, is kind of the easiest thing to latch onto in terms of what's problematic about this adaptation. Because, yeah, there's that casting choice, and then Heathcliff is, I think, one of the only, if not the only, black love interest in Victorian literature, yes. Right? But also, she strips out all the story about sibling rivalry, incest, animal abuse. There's lots of other important topics in there that are also removed. So if you're thinking of it as a 14, Fennell remembering herself at 14 reading the book, the only thing that remains in the film are the kind of GCSE SparkNote quotes from the novel, and everything else is very much about how we feel Wuthering Heights should be. So there's the references to Kate Bush in there, and the costuming, and even, some of the scenes where she's on the moors. There's the Laurence Olivier version of Heathcliff, where, this Heathcliff, Fennell's Heathcliff, is completely chastised, and, he's not the wolfish creature that Bronte describes at all. He's so sanitary, so woke, it's almost, hilarious to watch him. And then there's Wuthering Heights interesting because of the kind of Victorian politics about hereditary and women's place in that. And when you strip out, there's only the five main characters. There's Cathy and Heathcliff and Linton's. And they, in the novel, have siblings and fathers, and, that really complicates it because they're not just doing a wife swap, which is what they're doing in Fennell, and making them adults as well. So it's not these.
A 35-year-old woman playing Cathy seems extraordinary, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I really do rate Margot Robbie in it because Cathy in the book is really unlikable and annoying and petulant, and the second half of the novel is great because you get to see all these awful characters die. Margot Robbie's great at being incredibly annoying as Cathy. You don't like her, you don't want to be her, and I've
got a question about reading this as a 14-year-old girl, and I wonder how much psychological damage it did to lots of little girls or teenagers who found Heathcliff incredibly sexy and the story just compelling. And did that make us all want to be with a bad boy?
I'm not sure. Possibly. That trope has persisted. 50 Shades of Grey, you've mentioned, that's often being brought up in relationship to this film as well. It is interesting that sort of, for many people, might become a blueprint for an ideal relationship. Personally, that wasn't what I took from it at all. What endured with me actually was the ghost scene at the very beginning of the novel, which isn't in the adaptation, spoiler, where what we see is Heathcliff's outpouring of emotion, which for a century very much known for its kind of emotional restraint is incredibly groundbreaking and quite sensitively done on Bronte's part. And then it's later that he's revealed to be still, even in youth and adolescence, that brutish character that he's introduced to us as, but having this kind of soft side. So maybe here's a bit more of a cinnamon roll than we anticipated.
Just going back to this New York Times A to Z, they have a category for this, G for Gothic romance. Intense love stories often feature gloomy manor settings, eerie, sometimes supernatural elements, and characters haunted by dark past. Was it sexy? Did we get a lot of Yorkshire scenery and so on?
So it's all, predominantly been filmed in a set. So it's kind of like it's like an old Hollywood movie in that way. So they could control the weather, the lighting, everything is kind of controlled. So it doesn't have that wild naturalness that I would associate with Gothic fiction. It's very staged, very set scenes, and kind of beautiful because of that. It exists in a weird liminal. We were saying yesterday, it sort of reminded us of Beetlejuice in a way, with these very strange, anachronistic houses against an almost plastic background.
I'm absolutely fascinated by something that you made, one of the comments that you made in your opening remarks, and saying that we seem to be living now through a period of decadence. And I've been running through my mind preceding periods of decadence and then what came after them. And I was thinking of the Roaring Twenties. I was thinking of Weimar Germany. And I'm thinking about the current period. And we know what came, sort of after the Roaring Twenties. We know what came after Weimar Germany. And if we're in a current period of decadence now, I'm wondering if we're in the sort of on the threshold of a similar sort of period. And since we began the discussion with geopolitical instability, and forgive me for bringing this back to my comfort zone, but do you see something in historical cycles of decadence, and what triggers their arrival, what triggers their departure?
Yeah, absolutely. And those examples that you mention, the Roaring Twenties, Weimar Berlin, those moments, those transitional moments that we now see on the threshold, on the cusp of actual decline. And I think the 19th century decadent period, the fin de siècle, the end of the 19th century, is quite interesting because there were these fears of decline and degeneration, cultural degeneration. So that's why there were such attacks on writers like Oscar Wilde for his, perceived degeneracy, his queerness, his effeminacy. Eventually, when we tipped into the 20th century, we did end up in these moments of collapse, but I think not quite in the way that the critics of decadence in the 19th century imagined. The
thing that I always comes back to for me is Lord Byron and Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. So that bit, the Eve of Waterloo. So that's his very famous poem. It describes the night before the 1815 Battle of Waterloo, and it focuses on the contrast between the Duchess of Richmond's ball in Brussels, which I think we're seeing at the moment, we're living through this, and of course the impending absolute deadly roar of the cannons. And it does feel like that moment, right?
I think so. I mean, one of the things that we have to bear in mind, and I think this is part of what Michael McFaul's comments at Munich were aimed to sort of dampen a bit, and that is my new favorite expression, which is recency bias. And recency bias is the feeling that everything that's happening to us right now is the worst it's ever been, where we actually have to maintain a certain amount of perspective and understand that we have been in moments like this over and over and over throughout the course of human history, and that actually some of these moments in the past have been far, far worse.
Yeah. Jessica and Alice, I know you've had a look at the New York Times list. So if you had to choose one of those for yourself, where would you put yourself?
Yeah, so Alice and I looked through the list, and as decadent scholars tried to find the most perverse ones. There's one, Sentient Objects, which is a whole range of romantic novels in which the object of lust and desire is not another person, but a thing. So there's some examples of, there's a door, someone falling in love with a door. I can imagine, someone falling in love with their phone, perhaps. It makes me think of decadence, because we mentioned Oscar Wilde in Dorian Gray. What runs through that novel, the impetus, is Dorian falling in love with his own portrait. You also have, Arab Boar, which is Huysman's quintessential decadent novel. In that, he retreats from Paris into a house filled with beautiful objects, and those objects replace his lustful desire. And thinking about Wuthering Heights, Fennell's adaptation, there's not to do too many spoilers, but a great scene where Margot Robbie, Kathy, sort of puts her finger into the mouth of a fish surrounded in gelatin. And it's kind of like a weird sort of penetration scene that's probably some of the most decadent moments are those little bits.
Do you have one?
Well, since my early research on decadence was about masochistic men, as you mentioned in the beginning, I was thinking about negotiated consent and, the importance in the BDSM genre of consent, which people are starting to realise. And I was also struck in Fennell's film how they sort of transformed the relationship between Heathcliff and Isabella from him being purely sadistic and, absolute rascal to her being a sort of consenting participant in what becomes a kind of BDSM relationship. So that was my choice.
So, Charles, what would you be then?
Yes, in addition to being the stern brunch daddy, there is, I'm going to pass on being the rake. That's for sure. There is secret relationships. Although, yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't want that to fall with quite the thud that it might be. But in the secret relationship category, we also see the story of my latest obsession, which is heated rivalry, and so that is a secret relationship Valentine, if you will, and it's exactly sort of about clandestine trysts, near misses, and the eventual realization that real love is worth living out loud.
Absolutely. Okay, well, for myself, I'm very, very happy to be an apron tugger. And with that, I think we have to leave you with the last one, which is that we wish you all HEA, which is, of course, happily ever after. Many thanks to Dr. Jessica Gosling and Dr. Alice Condé, to Charles Hecker, to Mariella Bevan, and all of you for listening to Monocle on Sunday, which will return at the same time next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin.